Hi, my name is Anne McElhinney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
Welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop. It is week 103 of the 2-week to flatten the curve lockdown. And in fact, if you think about it, next week is week 104, which will be 2 years. And I think it might be fair to say that we need to stop counting because it may be just over. Because in the two most restrictive places in America,
we happen to live in one of them.
New York City and LA County, basically everything has been lifted. All of the restrictions have been lifted. Except for, I think there's still, Magda, I'm just going to look at Magda here for this. Schools, have they stopped wearing masks in schools here? But basically most of the restrictions have been lifted. And that's just, in movie theaters, in shopping, attending school, working out, all that kind of stuff. You're not going to need masks and you're not going to need vax passports. But I have to say, this past weekend, it's been kind of interesting. I was in Costco, I was in Trader Joe's, and I was in Ralph's. And there are a very sizable number of people still hanging on to masks. And we were in a playground at the weekend on Saturday with our favourite 4-year-old. And incredibly, we witnessed, I think most people, in fairness, I'm looking at Magda, most people, I think, in fairness, in that playground were not wearing masks.
Correct.
However, we did spot one cool dude dad, real cool dude dad.
And that doesn't narrow it down much around here.
Not around here, no, exactly. With this little darling 2-year-old, and Magda and I both assessed the child as being 2 years old, wearing these huge, massive masks. And I looked at it and thought, how horrible, how nutty. And I was thinking, the dad, I would hazard a guess, he probably has two PhDs, probably one of them in feminist studies, by the way. But anyway, there he was with his 2 PhDs, probably, earning a fortune or whatever. And you know what? All the education he got made him really stupid, because I'm thinking, the child is out there playing by the beach, by the way, on plein air, right in the nice air around the place. Unbelievable, really horrible. And then just to look at the kind of big picture across the country. So Twitter is opening its offices starting March the 15th. Google employees can go back to their offices April 4th. Apple has told workers that they can go to the office 1 day a week starting April 11th and 2 times a week, 3 weeks later. But a lot of economists, and this is from the Morning Brew newsletter, basically economists have estimated that 3/4 of the increase in telework during COVID will continue past the pandemic. And a lot of what they're actually saying as well, that about 60% of US workers with jobs that can be done from home say that given the choice, they prefer to work from home.
I know.
And one of the things that they're saying, which I think is interesting, is that it's for people looking to get employees, to attract employees, allowing employees to work remotely is actually going to be a big selling point.
Look, 99% of employees would love not to work at all, and
that's also true.
I mean, and
yes. I don't know if it's 99% though, Phelim. I think you've got that statistic wrong. Exactly.
So,
not that I don't love work. God, I love work. I'm the exception. I just love it. I'm like Monday mornings. Just unleash me on it. You know what I mean? You know, that kind of way. Some of you lazy ones out there now. That's not me. Not at all. No.
Remember that company that decided to rename itself Monday?
No, I don't know that. That didn't last.
No, it lasted about a week. They rebranded, spent millions rebranding themselves, calling themselves Monday. PricewaterhouseCoopers decided to rebrand itself as Monday
for a week.
Yeah, until Monday.
Until they realized exactly how unpopular the word Monday was, and how it engenders rather negative feelings in people.
Well,
by the way, talking of which, can I just mention a thing? Quite a number. I'm getting to that age where a lot of people I know are retiring.
I thought you say a lot of people I know are dying, but I know.
No, a lot of people I know in Europe are retiring, and when you ask them how is that, their answer is uniformly the same. They say it's absolutely fabulous. Just mentioning that. Moving on, Phil.
But they're in denial, Anne.
They're in denial. No, they're saying every day. One particular friend of mine, she said, every day you wake up and it's just so wonderful. She used to be a teacher. Off you go there, Phelim. Tell us what's in the show today.
What's on our show today? We have Marc Morano, who's the editor of Climate Depot, which is the one-stop shop for all climate craziness. We're going to talk to him about Ukraine, gas, oil, and how we are funding the Putin war machine.
We talked to him earlier, and it's an amazing interview.
What else is on the show? This is really getting stupid. Dear America and dear world, what is with the ludicrous anti-Russian madness? And you're demanding loyalty tests from artists and sports people. This is America. We don't demand loyalty tests. We don't order people to denounce people in public before we give them jobs or let them do their art or let them do their work. We're going to look at the a really distasteful anti-Russian madness that seems to have swept both corporate and the artistic world at the moment. And it even affects cats. So we'll look at that later on.
And we're going to bring you a really great recipe that I made this past weekend. It has a lot of ingredients. I think it might be the recipe with the most ingredients I've ever made, but it's a great recipe. It actually
is. It's a lovely. It makes me rethink salads. I got an email from the Kirk Douglas Theatre up in Culver City.
Oh yes,
part of the Centre Theatre Group, and basically you weren't able to get in to see their art. Not only if you weren't vaccinated, but you had to be boosted.
Oh yeah,
you had to be boosted, and it's like. So, when they tell you they want to open the arts to the underprivileged and to the minorities and to all this, and and that's why they're diversifying, and that's why there's all these plays about racism and all. What they're really saying is we want our material to appeal to the white upper middle class, because they're the people obsessed with racism, and they have no interest in bringing underprivileged or people from minorities into their theatre.
And the reason you're saying that, film, is because there's a vax hesitancy.
Vax hesitancy is among minorities, and so therefore they are excluding a large proportion of those minorities from the theatre. So.
And by the way, if you're going to go there, film, I think it's worth mentioning then that in fact the vaccination itself, the whole vaccination and booster program was obviously discriminatory against minorities, right?
Why?
Well, apparently, if you have to show ID, that's discriminatory. Am I not right about that?
Funny.
So
also,
if you have to show,
going to the Kirk Douglas Theatre, you need to show ID as well.
So if you have to show ID to get a vaccination, it's obviously discriminatory, because that's the reason why people don't want anyone to show ID when they're voting. Mm-hmm. Voting is one thing, but getting a vaccination is even more serious. But you couldn't get a vaccination without showing ID.
Yeah.
And you couldn't even get a cup of coffee without showing ID along with your vaccination.
Well, you can't get in.
Moving on
to the Kirk Douglas. You may have a vaccination certificate, but if you don't have ID, you won't get in either. So let's go over now to Marc Morano, the editor of Climate Depot. It's a great interview. We did it just before we came on air. This will bring home to you why Russia is able to invade Ukraine and how we helped, not we as in the elites, American policy helped fund Putin's invasion of the Ukraine. Let's go over to that interview with Mark now. So welcome to the show, Mark. Marc Morano is the editor of Climate Depot, the one-stop shop for all your climate questions, and the best place for all the facts that expose the current climate craziness that wants to end our golden age of fossil fuels. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Phelim. I'm happy to be here today. Appreciate it.
So, Mark, if anyone goes to your site, climatedepot.com, the first thing they see is a link to and I want to read the exact title. It's a 2018 congressional report entitled Russian Attempts to Influence and Fund Environmental Groups to Oppose Fracking in Europe and the US. And I just want to add that if anyone had watched our 2013 documentary, they would have seen that we came to the same conclusions. But so why would Russia, we're asking this in the context of the Ukrainian invasion, but I'll come back to that later. But why would Russia want to fund hippie environmental anti-fossil fuel
Well, maybe just the Russians are just those kind of maybe they're just environmentalists. Explain it to us.
Are
Mark.
they just nice people?
Yeah,
they're tree huggers. That's what Putin's been known for. Always. No, it's not because they're nice people. This was a 2018 report by the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology in the U.S. House of Representatives. And what the report found was essentially that the Russians have been funneling money through offshore corporations and passed on to U.S. environmental activist groups, and with the intent of supporting European and United States environmental group goals of limiting European and American energy. They wanted to fund efforts to cut down on fracking and oil and gas exploration and coal in both Europe and the United States. That's what Russia was interested in.
And does the congressional committee, did they have any idea to what extent this, how much money are we talking about here?
That is a great question. There's probably it's hard to say, tens of millions or higher. That's one of the things they were looking at, but there's so many different shell corporations. I don't know that they actually put a direct quantification on it. But what's interesting about the report, Anne, was Hillary Clinton was actually quoted as saying, we at the state, when she was the Secretary of State, we at the State Department were against Russian pushing oligarchs and others to buy media and up against, quote, phony environmental groups. And Hillary goes on to say, I'm a big environmentalist, but these groups were funded by Russians to stand against any efforts against pipelines and other things. So even Hillary Clinton was aware that the funding was going through creating what she called phony environmental groups.
And can I just, and since this kind of revelation, and I mean, as Phelim said, we actually talked about this in Frack Nation, it's interesting to look at how successful those anti-fracking campaigns have been. Can you give us a picture of how successful they have been in terms of what used to be in terms of natural gas production in Europe and what is now?
And can you tell us, I think we need to also work out here, why would Russia be funding these groups?
Yes, and I'll get to that. Okay, well, first of all, in Europe, Germany used to have many times higher levels of natural gas than Russia, and now it's flipped to where Europe is about 40% dependent, 38% dependent on Russia's natural gas. All of Europe is Germany is near 50% dependent. It's the point now where Vladimir Putin can determine by cutting off the oil supply to particularly Germany and others, he can create a recession. He has the power at this point, the way the trajectory, the higher the gas prices and oil prices go, to actually be the number 2 economy behind Germany in Europe. And here's how the madness goes. In 2019, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was so gung-ho to virtue signal against fracking that he actually had 2 wells that could have provided 50 years of natural gas to Britain. In other words, they would have been energy independent. They poured concrete into those fracking wells as a motion to seal them up, to show Europe and the Greens that UK was committed to the net zero policies. And they actually poured concrete into fracking wells that would have provided 50 years of energy. And that's incredible.
Boris Johnson, what an extraordinary disappointment. I have a quote here from, I think it was from Reuters. 15 years ago, Europe exported more natural gas than Russia does today. I mean, extraordinary. And now Russia exports 3 times more gas. And we're just completely frightening the number of countries that are so vulnerable. You mentioned Germany, but also like Austria, 64% of their natural gas is coming from Russia. Places like, well, Finland is in an awful place. 94% of their natural gas. Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's 100%. Macedonia, 100%. Moldova 100%. But down to even France, 24% of their natural gas.
So, I mean, just to put this in context, this is why there's a real reluctance to take on the Russian bear. And this is also why Putin is able to fund the war in Ukraine, right? It's because all this money every week, Billions. We're stopping Visa transactions and we're stopping Apple Pay and you can't get Netflix or whatever it is. Europe is sending hundreds and hundreds of billions a month to Russia. And that is going directly to, it's got a double bind. It's going directly to fund the Ukraine invasion, but it also makes these countries completely reluctant to stand up to Russia because Russia has them over a barrel.
And this is it. This is why Russia has been funding and supporting environmental groups, because they know that if Germany, the United States, England and all these other European nations say, we're not going to buy this oil, we're not going to buy this gas, what's going to happen? They're canceling the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They're hurting themselves possibly more than they're hurting Putin at the moment. That's the thing. Putin at this point has nothing to lose. But we're talking, if the United States gets 10% of its oil from Russia. By the way, in 2021, we hit a 11-year high for Russian oil imports in the United States. If we get 600,000 barrels a day currently of Russian oil. Here's the problem, is that if Joe Biden had literally not done what he did his first day in office and then continued after that, but he shut down, obviously, you've heard it all, the Keystone Pipeline,
yes,
drilling on federal lands. He went after fracking, death of 1,000 cuts. But one of the things people don't realize what the Biden administration has done is they've literally used an environment social governance style in our Treasury Department to start defunding fossil fuel energy projects. He has his Treasury Department set up. First of all, every cabinet agency is a climate agency under Biden. They're administering the Green New Deal through the administrative state, not a vote of Congress. There's no hearings, there's no debate. The Green New Deal hasn't passed Congress, but it's being implemented in the administrative state. And so what they've done is they've crippled not only our fossil fuels, but they've sent a signal to the marketplace. And we all know how energy markets are all based on anxiety and future markets. And what Biden did is said, we're closed for business. And that's the problem. If we cut off Russian oil now, we could end up going into a recession a la 1970s Jimmy Carter that we haven't seen since the gas crisis of the 1970 and the long gas lines.
Can I explain that to me? I'm not clear there, Mark, what that means. So you're saying that we're dependent on Russian oil as well?
Yeah, the 10% of oil we get, again, they're behind Canada and Mexico, is Russia for US oil imports. It sounds great. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying there's two sides to this coin. If we shut it, what that's going to do first off is send a signal to the market, even talking about shutting it off, which is what Blinken is now doing at the Biden administration. Oil just shot up, I think, another $15 a barrel just on the talk of it. But if we actually say we're not buying Russian oil imports, boom, gas, a barrel goes up, gas at the pump goes up. And I don't know how much more, because that creates the inflationary cycle of all the trucks that deliver. Food prices are now year over year are hitting records. I think it's 25 or more % in America and other countries. We are risking all this. And again, how much is it going to hurt Putin? And how long will it take to hurt Putin? And does Putin care about being hurt at the moment? I don't know. But it's something we have to consider. This is the problem. We put ourselves in this position from just, again, 2 years ago with Donald Trump's presidency. We were the world's largest oil and gas supplier. We had more energy exports than imports, more energy production than consumption for the first time since Harry S. Truman in 1952 was president. We started dismantling all that. And this is where we are a year into the Biden administration. It's devastating. That and the COVID lockdowns didn't help.
And can you explain it? So the XL pipeline was shut down. That whole project was shut down, which, yes. What would it have done if it had happened?
Well, first of all, it wouldn't, here's an important point, and media matters, jumps all over everyone. It still wouldn't have been pumping yet, but the idea is Biden canceled it. But first of all, it would send a signal to the marketplace initially that we're open. But eventually, the Canadian oil, it's still going to happen at some point through rail service and other things, but it's going to be a much slower pump to get it down to the Gulf. That would have had a huge impact on natural gas flowed, first of all, not only in jobs, every Democrat labor union supported it. Democrat labor unions who supported both Hillary, Biden, and Obama all endorsed this pipeline and railed against Obama and Biden for delaying and or canceling it. But this would have been huge, because we would have been getting our natural gas from an oil from a friendly democracy that has high environmental standards, i.e. Canada, instead of other countries. And by the way, Israel had an East Med pipeline that they had a deal with Greece, and the Trump administration greenlighted. Guess what happened in January? Biden administration killed a nearly 1,200-mile pipeline of natural gas from Israel to Greece that would have supplied many parts of Western Europe. This is the insanity we're living. And by the way, the answer for that from the Biden State Department when we pressed was they had to go green. This is back in January. We found it in documents. A State Department official said, we're canceling this Israeli pipeline, same reason as the Keystone XL pipeline, because we need to go green in our net zero goals for Europe and the United States. This is the insanity in which we're facing right now with the Biden administration.
Is there any hope at all that people, we were just talking about this before we started the interview, is there any hope at all that people will learn from this? Are you at all optimistic that there might be anyone would learn about the importance of producing our own energy?
No, it's a great question. And here's my analogy. And look at what happened with the defund the police movement. From what was that? Less than 2 years, you went from not only defund the police, but abolish the police. And then we saw that experiment play out in real time. It's easy to say defund and abolish the police, you know, when you're there and the police departments are already in existence. But then you start seeing it happen in real action. You see what happens in San Francisco and Seattle and Chicago and New York and Washington. Less than 2 years later, Democratic President Joe Biden is on the floor of the United States telling the State of the Union, saying we need to fund the police. And you see Kamala Harris stand up and applaud, and Democrats stand up and applaud. That's a complete policy reversal. Mm-hmm. So what I think could happen, and this is the hopeful message here, for a decade plus, and I remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger was in California and he passed his big climate bill. I said, this is so easy for someone like Schwarzenegger. He gets all the virtue signaling, he gets all the pats on the back, the environmental groups, the media, everyone loves him, Hollywood celebrities. but he's done nothing because the consequences of what Arnold Schwarzenegger did back in 2006 or 8, I believe it was, won't be felt until 5-7 years later. And now, of course, California is feeling the consequences as they face the highest energy prices and rolling blackouts and future blackouts to come. But it didn't have any consequence. So I think what's happened here is, for decades, politicians in Europe and the United States were able to virtue signal to the green movement with no consequence. 2030 goal, 2025, this tipping point, we're going to do this, we're going to have net zero. It all sounded great. Pour concrete in the fracking wells. We're serious about this. And then what happens? The chickens have come home to roost. And so if you look at what's happened with the German chancellor, I cannot remember his name, but he replaced Angela Merkel. You may have his name in front of you, but he just came out and reversed Germany's net zero policies and said, right now we're going to do oil, gas, and all sorts of fossil fuel energy because we need it now. This is in our national security interest. So let's hope that this actually has a huge impact. I think it will in the midterms. I think the American people get it, but who knows? The way things are going with the rapidity we've seen, Joe Biden could be praising coal and gas and oil by the next State of the Union address if this goes the way it could.
It's funny, you talked earlier about Keystone, and everyone says, well, it wouldn't have been pumping now.
Yes.
That reminds me of Anwar back in, was it, in the early Bush years when Congress banned any drilling in Anwar, and it was in like 2002 or 2005, something like that. And they said, well, there wouldn't be any drilling for 10 years anyway. Like, well, we'd be drilling now, and we'd be getting oil and gas from Anwar and not needing it from Putin. So, I mean, this thing of, well, it wouldn't be drilling for 5 years or 4 years. Like 5 years and 4 years come along. And
they do. And that's the thing. And again, this is energy. So you're looking at a whole pie with energy markets, trading, and prices. So if you're opening up, here's the thing, just imagine if for some reason Donald Trump was inaugurated or had won the presidency, was elected, and his first day in office, say tomorrow, was to literally open up America. The price per barrel of oil would drop. The price at the pump would drop. Your home heating would drop, just because it would send a signal to the marketplace. You cannot divorce that kind of the idea of a policy coming from up high, the federal government saying we're open for business energy wise, to we're going to keep everything shut down because we have to, quote, go green, and let's cancel more pipelines. That's insane. And what's interesting here is people are all focused on how can we sanction Russia. It's time to lift the sanctions on American energy exploration, on European energy exploration. Until we get that through our politicians' heads, we're doomed. The problem now is Jen Psaki, climate activists are all doubling down. I saw this on CNN last week, an article where they're all saying this is an incredible opportunity as our energy prices skyrocket. We can finally now go solar and wind, and we no longer have to rely. This is why we've said we needed to go solar and wind for years. The problem is solar and wind aren't there to take its place. And that's always been the problem, no matter how many billions of dollars we've spent, no matter how many tax credits, no matter how many subsidies, no matter how many economic green stimuluses we give. Yeah, you can make some things look successful for a couple of years, and then the subsidies dry up and the companies go like Solyndra and others.
Or you have a Texas scenario where unseasonable freeze and the wind turbines stop working and people die. So, and if you look
I think it's also worth mentioning, because I think sometimes, because maybe somebody, a lunatic environmentalist is listening to this, is to remember that the biggest problem with renewables, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, is the fact that the battery situation has not been solved, and that you can't store the energy, so that while wind, when it works, and while solar, when it works, is brilliant and all kinds of great energy, they can't store it. That's the great thing about fossil fuels. It's basically inbuilt in it that it's actually a storage, and it can be ramped up and ramped down whenever you need it. And I think I saw somewhere recently kind of an amazing statistic that the battery capacity sort of worldwide for renewables is something like minutes. Not even an hour, it's like minutes is what they're able to store right now. So we are years away from being able to make this transition that everyone is lauding. And in the meantime, all these governments are making all these countries, all these places super, super vulnerable.
They are, and they just keep doing it, whether it's your local town, state governors, US government, our bureaucracies, Europe, they all keep claiming these net zero goals. And you're absolutely right. What the absurdity is, people who say, oh, we need, clean, green energy. Well, first of all, you need diesel generators, gas backup. And Michael Moore brilliantly did it in his Planet of the Humans, his film, where he showed the absurdity of these activists with, I believe there were solar panels, and they literally, like the scene from The Wizard of Oz, they pulled back the curtain to show that this big media demonstration for their solar panels and green energy was all being powered with the backup of the diesel generators and on the power.
Not to
make this all about ourselves.
But if you
exactly.
back when we were promoting Not Evil Just Wrong, Franny Armstrong had a documentary out called The Age of Stupid, and she had the first green movie premiere in downtown Manhattan, where it was a zero carbon, and like it was. I wandered through the big set the day before. There was diesel generator after diesel generator after diesel generator.
Oh, and I was actually going to mention the other point is that in Ireland, where the Irish government in their wisdom has made people there extremely vulnerable to blackouts, you cannot buy a diesel generator for love nor money. They laughed at us at the local hardware store. They were like, we're not even going to put you on a waiting list.
Yeah, there's no order. You cannot be put on a waiting list for a diesel generator in Ireland because they say it's dishonest because they can't get.
They just can't keep up with.
Well, that reminds me of in East Germany. You remember you had to put your name on for an East German Trabant, which was a horrible car, but you had to wait decades for it. That's what happens when you create shortages and you have politicians under influence of lobbyists and ideologues make these goals. It's just nuts. And here's the thing: we go back to the clean green just for a minute. It requires rare earth mining. This is now, I think, estimates for solar and wind, we get 90% of our solar panels from China. China is now going to be the world's, essentially the world's monopoly, if you will, next to Russia for this rare earth mining. China's doing it in China with Uyghur slaves. They're also doing it in places like the Congo, where Amnesty International said they're using underage labor. They're going deep in the earth to extract cobalt, other rare earth minerals, also electric car batteries for solar and wind panels. So we've essentially given up our energy independence and dominance, again, like I mentioned, for the first time since Harry Truman, in exchange for the virtue signaling, feel good green, but that has real consequences of now relying on China for rare earth mining and the green energy, relying on OPEC for more oil. You had the disgusting scene of the Biden administration last summer in 2021 begging OPEC to increase oil production.
Yeah.
And then, of course, then we're more dependent on Russian oil, 11-year high last year in terms of Russian oil imports. And that probably has gone up this year. I haven't seen the latest stat on that. But this is the reality of green energy. And it goes back to the point, Anne, can people wake up? Could it be like a defund the police, moment of clarity? I don't know, but that's our job to try to help the public.
Well, something might happen when even to crazy Californians, where they're now looking at like numbers that they've never seen numbers like this, nearly close to $7 at the pump here. One other point I just wanted to mention there when you mentioned rare earth, because I always want to mention this point, because again, if people should know this for that relative that you have who is annoying you incessantly about their green energy and renewables. Yeah. Why is it, and I know the answer, but I'll let you answer it. Why is it that all the rare earth is being mined in China when there are big deposits of rare earth here, but we don't mine them? And why is that now, Mark?
I'm glad you asked the question. Because in 1998, I did an investigative report on the Mali-Core mine outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. It was actually in the Mojave Desert. And what they mined was a rare earth element called lanthanide, which is actually used in our catalytic converters. This mine was shut down by, I think it was 27 or 29 different federal agencies for all sorts of environmental concerns. But you know what got them in the end was they found a desert tortoise, which was allegedly endangered. Now, hold on. The tortoise as a species isn't endangered, but what the environmental groups do in our government and the BLM, and I'm not talking about Black Lives Matter, but the Bureau of Land Management, the federal agency, they get a species, and at the end of their natural habitat where they're going to thin out, which is where the Mali-Core mine was in the Mojave Desert, that's where they say they're regionally endangered. So it wasn't actually an endangered species. They actually interviewed a herpetologist in Nevada who said, no, these aren't endangered, but where the mine is, that they're regionally endangered, meaning they're at the edge of their habitat where you would expect less numbers. So they shut the mine down. we interviewed a man named 𝙎𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, who represented the Chinese mine. He was based in San Francisco, but he was, the mine was in China. He actually laughed on camera to us, and he said, yeah, Molycorp is closing down. And he said, actually, that we don't have the same environmental standards in China. We don't have to worry about those kind of rules. We can mine and do that. So now China is going to take over. This was back in the 90s, where China was on the, people didn't really see him as a threat, and they didn't have their messaging down. This guy was bragging about how the US mine for rare earth elements were being shut down, and how China was ready to step in, and step in they did. We are getting, the problem is China, Russia, Iran, OPEC, Venezuela, they're not going to follow the same environmental standards. We have the cleanest, US, Canada, Europe, the cleanest, highest environmental standards in the world. Israel, which would have been the East Med pipeline, but we're the ones shutting down, and we're making all of us, the collectively free West, now dependent on these, conflict regions or rogue regimes, whatever word you want to. And this is where we are in 2022.
And on top of all that as well, places that really couldn't give a crap about environmental standards.
No, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. People say, well, why is this happening? And just to do a larger point, this isn't the unintended consequences of green policies. I believe what we're seeing in the US with these higher prices is the intended consequences of green energy policies. You go back to John Holdren in the 1970s, who said the US had too much energy too soon. He lamented people hopping in their car to go get a 6-pack of beer and drive home from the supermarket. This goes back to Obama's first energy secretary, Stephen Chu, who said he wanted European style gas prices in the United States. Guess what? We got it. This goes back to Obama saying he wanted electricity prices to necessarily skyrocket. This goes back currently to Joe Biden's current energy secretary, Jennifer Granholm, in 2018, did a video with your old friend, Bill McKibben, the climate activist, saying this is the end of gasoline. We have to keep it in the ground because the world is aflame due to global warming. She sang, performed in it, laughed, joked. This was her video. This is our energy secretary.
By the way, that same secretary is the woman who was asked quite recently, I think you probably saw that. She was asked, like how much energy is being, how much oil is produced every day in America? And she was like, yeah, I don't know those numbers right now. But
is she also the same one who got on a private jet during COVID and went off on a vacation while the rest of her state?
I don't know that.
Oh no, it was her husband. Anyway, I think she's got some private jet issues.
I think she doesn't know an awful lot about energy, but then I think an awful lot of people don't know an awful lot about energy. But I'll tell you one thing, they're getting quite the education right now.
Well, here's the other thing on the same vein. And I did this story, I guess it was last August. The Washington Post in August did an article that had Ronald Reagan never been elected. In other words, that Jimmy Carter had a second term. And this was their exact quote: there'd be no climate crisis today. They said that Jimmy Carter was a visionary about wind and solar and green energy, and that had he had a second term, we could have avoided the climate crisis. Now, keep in mind that you've seen the charts that show every UN conference since the 1970s, CO2 continues to do this. Despite all the planet-saving agreements that they have, nothing they've done has ever impacted CO2, number one. But number two is, this gives you an idea where the media and academic elite are. The Washington Post believes that President Jimmy Carter's one term in office from 1977 to 1981 was a model of how, if only he had another term, we could have solved the climate crisis. If you go back to 1977 to 1981, Jimmy Carter's one and only term, you had rapid inflation, skyrocketing energy prices, energy crisis in America. You had America projecting weakness in the world. You had foreign policy crisis. It's frightening. They must be loving Joe Biden. The Washington Post, the media, academia, this is what their vision is. They're finally getting Jimmy Carter's second term. And in their mind, somewhere they must think this time we'll be able to solve the climate crisis. Darn that Jimmy Carter didn't win a second term and Ronald Reagan did, but at least we have Joe Biden. And that's where we are right now. I'm not making it up. Your listeners your viewers can actually go check the Washington Post.
Okay, Mark, I think that's us finished for today. We could talk
a lot.
We could talk a lot more, but it's good to get this out here. And you're right. Maybe this is the
wake up call.
This is the defund the police, the green movement's defund the police moment.
Yeah,
that's my hope. And just the other last thing I was going to say is John Kerry will say climate is the greatest national security threat we face. They can find some generals to say the same thing. First of all, they're wrong. History's shown that cooler periods are actually have more conflict, resource scarcity, and more wars. And then warmer periods were called climate optimums, less war, less resource scarcity. But here's the thing. Their climate and energy policies are the greatest national security threat we face. And we're living it right now in real time.
Well, I think I said that in last week's podcast. Zelensky, he may need ammunition, but what he really needs is gas, not from Russia. What Germany needs is gas, not from Russia. They don't need American arms; they need American gas, natural gas. Or they need their own natural gas. If they had that, there'd be a lot less need for ammunition.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. I think we'll be talking again soon, I hope.
Thanks, Mark.
Right. Thank you, and
all the best. Bye.
I
don't know. Mark.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure we're going to learn.
I wonder, is this the moment when the Greens learn, when the elites learn, or are they just going to make, as somebody says, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing again and again, hoping you get a different result? So, talking of Ukraine and Russia, we've received some criticism last week. A lot of our fans think we were somehow too sympathetic to the Ukrainian side in the conflict, or didn't understand the nuances of it. Let's just say, first of all, our job is not to be sympathetic to one side or the other. And I wish a lot of journalists in the corporate and mainstream and conservative and liberal media would remember that, or maybe they never knew that. Our job, in fact, is to show you what this information is. Our job is to show you what the truth is. Our job is to go and give you context. Our job is to interview people like Marc Morano and see how you can stop people invading other countries, how your policy might contribute to that. We lived for 7 years as journalists in Romania. We've covered stories in Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova. We've traveled in the area as far apart as we were in Moscow. We were in Uzbekistan. We were in stands that you never knew existed.
We're in China.
China. So we were all very much concerned about the environmental movement and energy in those trips. So we do know a lot about the area. And we do know, and I just want to look at some of the arguments that people are making, saying, Russia's not the bad guy here, and Ukraine's actually the bad guy. That's simplifying their arguments. But some of their arguments are, like, for example, and there was let's put up a picture. There was a protest on Venice Beach by the lefties at the weekend. It's all NATO's fault for expanding, and that's from the right wing community too. That's a big line, is that NATO expanding it has provoked Putin, and that's the cause of the Ukrainian invasion. Look, the reality is, if you spend any time in Eastern Europe, you will know that there would be no need for NATO if there was no Russian imperialism. The history of these East European countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Poland, all of these countries, Romania, Bulgaria, is invasion after invasion from Russia. And in the years that they weren't being invaded by Russia, they were invaded by Germany. The Austro-Hungarian Empire. But mostly the big enemy of these countries, of their self-determination, was Russia. I am a big fan of Lord Palmerston. I read a lot of biographies. He was kind of the Churchill of the 1800s in Britain. And one of his biggest problems was, dashing Polish cavalry officers coming to London, demanding that the British intervene against the latest Russian invasion of Poland. So this has been going on. So there would be no need for NATO. There would be North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Who are they? What was NATO set up for? It wasn't to stop China.
That's what I was going to say.
It wasn't to stop China invading the south of France, or it wasn't to stop Australia from invading Poland, or Venezuela from attacking the Ukraine. It was an organization to stop Russian aggression in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And at the time it was set up, Russia controlled hundreds of millions of people. And one thing you do not want to be in this world is under Russian control. And if Russia was a free economy, there'd be no need for Russian imperialism, because the economy would expand itself. The reason, part of the reason they're going to the Ukraine is because of its natural resources, because this is what countries that are not free, that do not have functioning economies do. They take the resources of other countries. Imperialism stopped pretty much, there's a bit of an overlap, but imperialism became less fashionable when the world economies opened up and capitalism took over. So there's another argument. Russia is an ally against China. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. Europe needs to get off its addiction to Russian oil and gas. But if it does, Russia needs a market for its oil and gas. And its nearest big neighbor that could consume oil and gas is a place called China. And China needs energy. So the pipelines will just be redirected and it'll be China. And Russia will not want to be an ally of the West against China. And by the way, if you ever spent any time in Moscow, I was explaining it earlier, Moscow, it's like Manhattan. It's this great, great, great city in the center of this great, great country. And the people there are very, very proud and they behave like they are a superpower. And, they are not going to be an ally against China. They are going to plow their own furrow. So they will not be our ally against China. And I suppose you got to ask, why are conservatives so skeptical of supporting the Ukraine, or not even supporting the Ukraine, but seeing Russia as an aggressor in this war? And, it's because the mainstream media, and I appreciate this, the mainstream media has been lying to you for 50 years. And I think I spoke to Molly Hemingway there of The Federalist and of Fox News the other day. And she says, it's wrong to call them mainstream media because the views of mainstream journalists in the mainstream media are not mainstream.
Yeah.
Like they are 5 or 10% of what America believes. So, for example, the mainstream media or the corporate media, they peddled this lie about Russian collusion during the Trump years. It was a complete lie. They also peddled the lie that Brexit was a Russian-funded operation, trying to ignore the very real feelings against the European Union in working class Britain. And then that was reflected then when they all turned and supported Boris Johnson's Conservative Party for the first time in literally hundreds of years in the last election. So there was no Russia collusion with Trump. There was no Russia collusion for Brexit, but the media peddled it and peddled it. They've been telling lies about Russia for a decade now. And surprise, surprise, mainstream media, when you then try and convince conservatives that this is an act of aggression by Russia towards the Ukraine, they will be skeptical. So it's not, we're not sympathetic to one side or the other, but we've got to call out the facts. But we do understand why many, many people are skeptical about the mainstream narrative coming out of Ukraine. And there's a lot of misinformation coming out of Ukraine from the Ukrainian side. But it's not actually misinformation. It's kind of propaganda. And, and that's understandable almost in some ways. All nations at war have propaganda. And I suppose you have to be very careful to distinguish between propaganda and misinformation. So one's a lie. The other is a heartwarming story, possibly exaggerated to evoke an emotional reaction. And, you probably try and avoid the emotional reactions. It's very difficult. But as journalists, we're going to keep trying to parse the truth from the propaganda, from the misinformation. And that's all we're going to do. And, that sort of brings, talking about emotion, it brings me on to what I want to talk about today. It's this anti-Russian, weird anti-Russian hysteria that's sweeping America and Europe and the world actually at the moment. And this time it's different. I think the cancel culture has a lot to do with this. People are now.
Yeah, social media has made it easier for this to happen.
Yeah, but there was also this. There was already what was the thing? A roadmap for cancelling individuals, right? So it's previous. The world has been on fire before. We had the Cold War, we had Vietnam, we had invasions, but it's very, very rare for sporting federations per se to be punished when their country misbehaves. Normally what happens is countries boycott events such as the Olympics. Countries used to say, our athletes are not going to the Moscow Olympics in 1980, and then Russia boycotted the US Olympics the next time. But this crisis is different, and this is an anti-Russian hysteria. Countries and their people are prone to hysterical reactions against countries that they're the war of. Just ask the Saxe-Coburg Gotha family. And who is the Magda? Do you know who the Saxe-Coburg Gotha family are?
I know,
because I've written it here.
Queen Elizabeth.
Yes. So the royal family, the British are, as we used to say, the British royal family in the Irish news, because we couldn't say the royal family.
The British royal family.
The British royal family. Yeah, they were Germans, and their family name was 𝙎𝙤𝙤𝙃𝙪𝙤𝙀, because you can never have a simple name when you're a member of the aristocracy. Their name was 𝙎𝙤𝙤𝙃𝙪𝙤𝙀, and in 1917 they changed it to Windsor, the House of Windsor, because of anti-German sentiments sweeping the UK. And you can understand that, and that was a family decision, and also it wasn't attacking anyone. Then you had America interning people of Japanese descent after the unprovoked attack on Pearl Harbor. Nowadays these reactions are seen as overreactions, and America has even apologized for those internments. But it's important to remember, right, that these countries were at war with each other, right? America was at war with Japan. Pearl Harbor, which was an unannounced massacre of people in Pearl Harbor. And then Britain was at war with Germany in 1917. And the funny thing about the First World War is people believed the stories of German atrocities even though they weren't true. And in the Second World War, nobody believed the stories of German atrocities even though they were true. It's an interesting historical fact. But with this Russian invasion of the Ukraine, we're in completely new territory. I mean, it's kind of mad. FIFA has banned Russia from the 2022 World Cup. So rather, that's unprecedented. They've never barred China. They've never barred any African country that's involved in a war with its neighbors, and there's been many of them. There are the worst dictatorships in the world. I mean, they're having the World Cup in 2022, aren't they? Having it in the UAE or some other paragon
did they not just have the Winter Olympics in China?
Yeah. So,
no problem at all there.
So the Russian Formula One Grand Prix was cancelled, and, Russia and Belarus are being banned from volleyball, figure skating, chess, and badminton.
And they even banned the Russian and Belarusian athletes from the Paralympics, by the way, one day before the games began.
Banned. They didn't ban Russian athletes for widespread doping in Olympics, but because their government, which is not really a democracy, invaded. It's not like they can unelect Vladimir Putin. Invaded another country. They're suffering. And then, I mean, probably this is an act of mercy, but Eurovision
organisers, and Eurovision is a competition, a singing competition in Europe, which is kind of a bit of a joke. But anyway,
singing competition is stretching it. Anyway,
yes,
they've banned
it from Russian.
And in the ultimate,
well, I think this one's extraordinary, and I know a lot of people will really feel the hurt of this one. The United Nations of Cat Federations has banned Russian cats from its competitions. Fédération Internationale Feline, an international cat federation with members in about 40 countries, is banning Russian cats from its competitions for the next 3 months, joining the growing global backlash against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Kennel Club film, the organizer of
Dog Show,
has also banned, in the light of, here's what Crufts have said, in the light of rapidly evolving circumstances, it was a heavy heart that we have taken the decision not to allow exhibitors from Russia to compete at Crufts. Sainsbury's, I thought this was very intelligent though. Sainsbury's, which is a very big grocery store in the UK, is changing the name of its Chicken Kiev to Chicken Kyiv, and is joining Waitrose, Aldi and Morrison's in withdrawing a Russian-made vodka from the shelves in the latest action by British retailers.
Do you know what this reminds me of? This whole... It reminds me... So if you ever saw the movie Starship Troopers, and well, I'll play the clip now. There's a kind of a silly propaganda bit in the middle of it showing how people are uniting against the bugs, and you've got these kids stamping on... But let's play that clip now.
Everyone's doing their part. Are you? The war effort needs your effort. At work, at home, in your community.
I mean, that's meant as a joke, but then Sainsbury's are pouring Russian-made vodka down a drain and changing the name of Chicken Kiev, which is a very nice garlic chicken meat dish. You should cook it.
Very 80s, by the way.
Very 80s. I would say more 70s. This is crazy. And then you've got, of course, the tech companies, because they're such good people. They're joining the bandwagon. These elites they're such... There's no one capable of independent thought, or no one capable of standing up to a mob. This is mob, and it's by no means a defense of Vladimir Putin, and by no means a defense of the invasion of Ukraine, which is exactly what it is, and it's the invasion of a sovereign nation. But Apple is stopping all sales of iPhones, MacBooks, and Apple products in Russia. Facebook, Meta, Twitter, Google, Alphabet, and Netflix. Netflix is cancelling its TV shows and new series. So let's punish artists and actors.
Spotify closed its Moscow offices, so that's the end of music for the Russians.
And Joe Rogan. Volkswagen has stopped its operations in Russia. General Motors, Ford, BMW, Mercedes-Benz have stopped all exports to Russia. It goes on and on. Aircraft leasing firms have to
I thought this was an interesting one, actually. The aircraft leasing firms are set to terminate hundreds of leases with Russian airlines following Western sanctions. So basically, it's interesting, actually. A lot of these planes are leased by a company called AerCap, which is out of Dublin, which is an Irish company. But the European Union on Sunday gave leasing companies until March the 28th to wind up current rental contracts in Russia, which I don't know what exactly happens there, because those aircrafts are owned by this Irish company, and also there's a French company involved as well. I don't know, will they get the planes back? But the energy situation as well is extraordinary. ExxonMobil abandoned a $4 billion oil and gas project. Shell ditched its stakes and left major gas. And by the way, BP quit Russia with a $25 billion hit, which the shareholders have to obviously carry that, right?
Yeah, but this is then, cats and dogs, obviously, we feel for them, but then it gets really, really worrying when they move on to individuals. And this is what they're doing now. I mean, the level of businesses pulling out of Russia is unprecedented for countries that are not at war with each other. But that's businesses; they can do what they want, I suppose. And it asks the question: what happens when China invades Taiwan? What are we going to do then? Are we going to stop? Basically, China makes everything that we use.
Well, on the simplest level and the most frightening one, that happens. So China invades Taiwan, and we decide we're not going to buy anything from China. Yeah. So that's the end of every drug that is being manufactured in the world. Basically, 98% of them that's every drug that everyone is taking here in the United States, across Europe. That every last thing for heart, for cancer, all of it comes from China. So that's pretty dramatic stuff, right?
The precedent has been set. Let's see if Russia's not vital to anyone's needs, I suppose, except if you're
trying to keep your house
warm. So
in
so
France,
they can pull out of Russia. But then the madness continues and gets worse, because they're bringing this cancel culture now to a whole people, to individuals who just happen to have the wrong nationality and won't apologize for that nationality and won't say exactly what the Western elites want them to say about Putin.
One of the examples is this Anna Netrebko, who's out at the Met Opera. And by the way, this is Anna Netrebko, who's publicly said, I am opposed to this senseless war of aggression, and I'm calling on Russia to end this war right now, to save all of us. We need peace right now. Not enough.
Yeah,
that's not enough for the elites.
The Guardian put it very clearly. There's a Valery Gergiev, who was the conductor of the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra. The headline is "Denounce Putin or Lose Your Job." Russian conductor Valery Gergiev is given a public ultimatum, and these people have lost their jobs. And there's more of this happening. There's a guy losing his job as a Russian Formula One driver losing his job, and they're talking about not employing Russian sports stars, etc. Look, all I will say to the people who are firing these people is the names Sergei and Yulia Skripal. Now, you may not know who they are, right? And most people don't know who they are, but they are the father and daughter who angered Putin and lived in Salisbury, in the cathedral city of Salisbury in England, in the United Kingdom, which is about as far away from Russia as you can get, but not when you anger. Not far enough. Putin sent 2 poisoners over there, and it was Novichok, and put poison on their door handle or on a perfume bottle and killed both of these people. What these artists need to say to these board members and to these chief executives and all that is, I'll condemn Putin when you go to Moscow and stand in Red Square with a stop the war or an anti-Putin sign.
Oh yeah, let's see how brave you are then.
Or move your family there. Look, these opera singers have families there. These conductors, they have families in Russia. If they condemn Putin the way these people demand they condemn Putin, their family is in mortal danger. This is a man who killed Russians who were now British citizens living in the UK. Do you think he's not going to exact revenge against the family of a conductor or a member of an opera in New York? Of course he is. So head of the board of the Met and head of the board of the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra, move your family to Russia, stand in Red Square with a sign.
Because you sound so brave.
You sound so brave. Or are you just happy to condemn, to demand bravery from others, the kind of bravery that you would not do yourself? Can
I bring another little point in here that I'd like to ask you the question, Phelim, because I just think it's extraordinary. So Italy and France, by the way, have seized super yachts from these oligarchs, from these Russian oligarchs, and we've seen whatever hugely expensive yachts that have been seized. So I don't know, Phelim, but so is that a thing then? How does that work in law, by the way? So yesterday, so a few weeks ago,
you don't
I don't understand.
You don't understand, right?
So people
it's a technical term, right?
What's it called now?
Called illegal. Anyone out there who thinks it's great, and look, this is basically social justice warriors in government seizing yachts, right?
Again, we can just seize that now.
No, but they hate these yachts because of the inequality. And this is conspicuous consumptions. They hate these yachts. So they're not seizing companies belonging to these Russian billionaires. Think about it. It would just be easier to go because they're all registered at Companies House. The government, now I know they're freezing some bank accounts and freezing this, but they're making a big thing about seizing yachts. So it's performative social justice warriors in governments, and many of them are conservative governments. And let me tell you, people out there who support this,
be careful.
You be careful, because they're coming for the oligarchs' yachts now. But as we saw in Canada, they will freeze the bank accounts of truckers. They will seize the trucks of truckers. I mean, what's more important to a person? If you have 15 billion. Is a $500 million yacht important to you? Yes, it's important. Will it change your life? No. If you're a trucker and you have a truck worth $200,000, that's your life savings, and the government sees that. So you're now allowing the government to seize every significant asset of everyone. If you don't, and all these oligarchs, by the way, to get their money back is to condemn Putin, and it's like, yeah, but that's forced speech. Mm-hmm. That is you're forcing. This is Stalin-esque, actually. This is, if you go on TV and give a public confession of your misdeeds and your sins, you will be forgiven. By the way, Stalin didn't forgive you, then executed you. And we've seen, by the way, with cancel culture, apologizing does not stop the cancelling. Apologizing just accelerates the pile-on. So anyone who's told, if you just condemn Putin, and you'll get your job back, don't believe it. There's no record for it. And anyone who supports the seizure of these yachts or trophy homes in London, they're coming for you next. And you've just given them a roadmap. And talking of China.
Talking of China, yeah, that's very good. Yes. I like that little segue there, Phelim. So the recipe this week is Asian chopped salad, which you know what I was thinking? I just was thinking about this morning. I was thinking, me making an Asian chopped salad, is that like cultural appropriation by my part, Phelim? I don't know if I'm allowed to make an Asian chopped salad. I think not being from there and all.
I think the implication that Asians chop things is kind of racist.
There you go. So as I said, when at the beginning, this salad is really, really nice. I really highly recommend it. However, it does have an awful lot of ingredients. For the dressing, we have soy sauce, brown rice vinegar, sesame oil, not toasted, honey, vegetable oil, and then we had, of course I should say, ginger and garlic. And that all went in here and was blended into this nice sauce.
Will it blend?
We've got some carrot down here. I'm adding to that kale, red cabbage, nicely chopped, red pepper, yellow pepper, and then we have spring onions, which we've also chopped, and then we have edamame. And then coriander leaves.
Not chopped up?
No. And the sesame seeds. And we're going to mix that first. Look at the colours. Look at the gorgeous colour. It's actually looking like hers, isn't it? Look at those colours. So I'm just going to do this. With this good stuff. And then just before serving, add the peanuts. Really, really nice salad. As we said at the beginning of the programme, we needed to up our salad game. This is really upping your salad game, by the way. Really, really nice.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it. We've come to the end of the show.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the really nice messages. We've got a lot of really nice messages, including from you, Kathy Claus, getting on very well still in Texas. And yes, we will be probably coming to visit you one of these days, actually, because I think, yes, we've more news on all of that. But lots of messages also saying that they've really enjoyed last week's programme, particularly because of the information about the Ukrainian energy situation, the European energy situation.
That's
We got a lot of very good supportive messages on that, so I think you'll probably enjoy today with Marc Morano. We're really grateful to him. Not only is Mark like an expert, by the way, on all of this, he's a really dear friend of ours, him and his wife. So we just love them. And that's it from us. We are obviously still working on the movie, and we'll have news of that coming up. If you want to support us, please go to 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙀𝙗.com. The film looks amazing.
Yes.
And for those of you saying, get that film out right now, it's a process. There's music being composed. You have to do stuff with sound. You've got to do stuff with colour. It isn't an instant process, but we are going to get it out as quickly as possible. And we have a second very important project that we're also going to talk about very, very soon. And I think you're going to be really happy with that. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere where you're getting your podcast and give us a 5-star rating. It matters a great deal to us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.